squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
The trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hey everyone, it's Celebrate Truth Radio. I'm your host, Robbie Davidson, and we got a great one for you this evening. Don't go anywhere. Real quick, this is episode 96, and it is January 30th. 2021. And what a year it is. You thought that 2020 was crazy? Get ready for 2021. My goodness, so much has happened in just a short time. But real quick, I want to get into my guest this evening because it is incredible the amount of work, books, movies, everything this gentleman has done. Brian Godawa has been a professional writer and filmmaker for over 15 years. His creative versatility was born of a passion for both intellect and imagination, both left brain and right brain. The result, Brian is an artisan of word, image, and story that engages heart, mind, and soul. Just think Renaissance man. Brian is also an author and international speaker on art, movies, worldview, and faith. His popular book, Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment, is used as a textbook in schools around the country. He is a contributing scholarly writer to various journals and professional organizations, and his articles on movies and philosophy have been published around the world. His Chronicles series of novels are his most important contribution by incarnating the worldview and theology in narrative unlike anything you've read before. As an award-winning screenwriter, his first feature film was To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland. But his skills and experience quickly expanded to include writing and directing feature films, documentaries, and video promotionals. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, Brian. It's great to have you on Celebrate Truth Radio.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. It's great to be here.
Man, what a bio that is. Just absolutely incredible. The amount of, you go to your website and just the amount of work. How many books have you written now?
Well, I am old, so.
Well, I don't know. You might be surprised to learn how old I am. But anyways, how many books would you say you're on now?
Oh, I got like 25 books or something like that. Actually, I've got more than that because I also
25 books.
Actually, I've got more, closer to 30 because I had a bunch of scripts of mine over the years that I had written that were never made into movies, and I decided to go ahead and publish them. So technically, I've got about like 35. So
I'm like looking through all this stuff, and I'm like, you have all these books on the Nephilim and end times, and and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, he's written To End All Wars, Kiefer Sutherland. I mean, how did that all come about? Because what year was that movie came out?
Oh, that came out like 2001 or so, and so that was my first movie. So I had basically been living in California with the intent of making movies and such, and I was down Orange County, and I was trying to break into the business. It's basically, just beating the streets, doing everything I can, contacting producers and going to conferences and everything, just that you could do. And nothing was really grabbing hold. And so then one day I was going to a church, and there was one of the secondary pastors preached a sermon, and I was like, oh my gosh, he quoted Nietzsche and Francis Schaeffer in the same sermon. And I'm like, I love this guy. This is exactly how I am. And I told him that I had actually written a script on Nietzsche. You got to read it. So we started talking, and it turns out he was doing movie producing on the side while I was writing screenplays on the side, because my day job was graphic design. And we got to talking, and he's like, you know what? He read my scripts. He loved my writing. He goes, we got to work together. And he goes, I have the rights to this book. I've had it for like 20 years, haven't been able to get it made. Would you take a look at it and see if you'd like to write the script? And the book was through the Valley of the Kwai, which was the story of Ernest Gordon that became the movie To End All Wars. Well, I read it and I'm like, yeah, I can do this. This is amazing. It's a true story of World War II Allied prisoners of war under the Japanese in Thailand or Burma at the time, and what they suffered, under their Japanese captors. And it's the true story that you didn't see in the movie Bridge on the River Kwai. So this was the suffering and how they dealt with it. But one of the amazing things was that the way they dealt with the misery and the suffering and the lack of meaning in their life was they started a jungle university. And they scrabbled together as many little books as they could. I got a book on Plato, Shakespeare. They got a Bible, and they were able to cobble together a few of these books. And they started a little university where they were teaching these books. And they started teaching the Bible, and men started becoming Christians. And then it changed their lives and how they dealt with each other, and ultimately it changed how they dealt with their enemies. And so it was a powerful, powerful, true story. And I never thought it would get made because I don't know. I just didn't think. And boom, as soon as the director, David Cunningham, got interested in it, it took off, and it was independently produced. So they raised the money themselves, made the movie in Hawaii. And it was really amazing. In fact, we were going to be picked up by Walden. I don't know if Walden's still around, producing movies, but at the time they were. And Walden wanted to do it and take the movie on and distribute it and give it a Oscar campaign. But the problem was they were committed to not doing R-rated movies, and ours was R-rated because the men suffered a lot of brutality in the hands of their captors. And we tried to edit it down and make it more PG-13, but we couldn't get the R rating, so we never ended up getting picked up by Walden, and it ended up being taken up by Fox, and then there it is. And I was really proud of it because it was a movie that won awards from the veterans of foreign wars, as well as the Cannes Film Festival of Peace. So it was like both veterans and more pacifist types loved the movie because it was a very balanced artistic approach to the issues that we were struggling with. We were honest and transparent. We weren't trying to push something down people's throats. And so I'm really proud of that fact. So and also proud of the fact that the Japanese distributors were willing to distribute it because they said, even though they're the villains in the movie, right? But because we accurately portrayed a couple of their guys as being quite heroic in and of themselves. And so we were truthful in how we also depicted some of their characters. So
did you get Kiefer at a good price? Because this would come after 24, would it not? 24 was done before.
24 was already in process, but he hadn't won. I don't think he won the Grammy yet. But then as he got on, he won the Grammy, right, when he got on doing the movie. So it was well-timed, absolutely well-timed. But at the moment he was, and by the way, we also had Mark Strong in there, who now is a huge actor. And he was that was his, I don't know, I think it was his breakout role. and Robert Carlyle, some very
I gotta
good.
go check it out.
English
I've never actually seen it, so I have to actually go check it out.
It's on
now.
Amazon Prime.
Okay,
I think it's free.
Okay.
on Prime.
Well, Amazon Prime. I'll
Or it's
definitely check
super
it
cheap.
out. Yeah, To End All Wars, I will definitely check it out. Like I said, when I was researching beforehand, I started looking into feature films. I'm like, what? I'm like doing stuff with Kiefer Sutherland. And another thing too is you got Frank Peretti, The Visitation. I'm a huge Frank Peretti fan. It was one of my first fiction books when I got saved at the age of 21, This Present Darkness. Please tell me there's some good news somewhere, even a multi-million-dollar budget. Can you think it would ever get done, say in the next 50 years or so? I mean, I really do want to see that done, big budget style. I think it would be phenomenal.
Yeah, there are some of those books in that seem to be inevitable that they've got to become a movie someday, right? And This Present Darkness was definitely one of them. And at the time when it came out, it was very fresh and original take on it, spiritual warfare, demons, and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it did get picked up, and they developed it over many years. They kept trying to develop it, and they tried different angles. Unfortunately, they spent close to $15 million, I understand, developing it. And the problem is if another producer wants to come on and say, okay, I'll take the project from you and I'll make the movie because you guys aren't, you have to pay off that $15 million.
I wonder if they take a percentage. I mean, you were mentioning that before the show, saying 15 million just to take out over the rights. I understand that, but I mean, also, it's usually a certain amount of money just to take over the rights of the book, which I would imagine that's already been completed. So the question is, I'm sure they might be open to a percentage if it was done properly. But
I don't know. I don't know. But you know what? There's it's not the only book and not the only script that is languished. True. And there are many that have never seen the day.
Well, something like that needs to be done because I just think it'd be fascinating for the world to see it. Now, the question is, would any major studio pick it up? I doubt it. I mean, I think this would have to be, independent or something along those lines because there's just no way. And you can speak about this.
Especially
Hollywood.
Now.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you think Hollywood would touch that without completely massacring it?
It's too clearly Christian worldview.
Correct.
And and nowadays in Hollywood, it's being a Christian is you won't be able to get work. If they find out you're a Christian, and certainly if you're doing a Christian story, you're not going to get work. So, yeah, you're right. It's going to have to be picked up. But I have to say, there was in a way, Peretti was an inspiration to me. Because later on, many years later, the novels that I would end up writing, Chronicles of the Nephilim, would actually be sort of the next tier up, the next level up of that concept of supernatural warfare. Well,
let's get right into that. But before we do, let's just get into a little bit of backstory. About Brian, right? Like basically just give us your testimony on how did you even come to starting to do what you're doing today? Kind of give us your journey. I love to hear people's testimonies. I think that is such a powerful way that God works in people's lives. And just to kind of hear yours, I think would be really important. I do that pretty much on every show. So if you don't mind, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, I was raised as in a religious household, but my parents really didn't know God, and so they kind of went to church and stuff, and they were very, very moral, but they really just weren't true believers in Jesus, But I was exposed to that kind of morality and such, but I was always an artist, so always been an artist. I started out as a visual artist more when I was younger, so I've done illustration, graphic design, stuff like that. But my whole heart was that I've always been sort of obsessed with death, but really I'm obsessed with meaning. Death is the thing that I saw around me, and I saw it's inevitable, and I saw what's the whole point? If we're going to die, what's the whole point of life? There's got to be some meaning or purpose to it. And actually, I had an artist friend in high school commit suicide, and it really shook me because it's like, wow, why would someone do that? Why would someone find no meaning such that they would do something like that? So I'd always been struggling with looking for a meaning in life and such, and I thought, well, you know what? I looked at the famous artists of history, like Michelangelo was my personal favorite, and we're, long after he's dead, centuries after he's dead, we're still studying his artwork, and I thought, well, maybe if I could create artwork that could, bring healing or change in the world, and I could bring betterness to the world, and they would be studying my works later. And the problem is that even if I did do that, the reality would be wherever I went when I was dead, I didn't know where it would be, but wherever I would be, I thought, well, it wouldn't be doing me any good. I probably won't even know about it because, if I don't exist or if I'm on some other plane somewhere, it's like, what benefit would it be to me anyway? So what really is the meaning? And the other issue was I thought, I'm going to be I looked at my life. I looked at the lifeline of the universe, so to speak, and I thought, if you draw a line of the history of the universe, my existence is less than a blip or a dot on that huge line. It's almost nothing. So it really made me realize that life is very meaningless unless there's something greater, unless there's something bigger. And I didn't know what it was, and I certainly didn't. I believe there was a God, but it wasn't that important to me. But eventually I went to a Christian youth group, and they sort of explained the gospel to me, and I came to understand that, well, the reason why I didn't have really a sense that there was a God around, like, where is this God anyway, and how come I don't sense him or whatever? The reason why was because I was a sinner, like we all are. I'm a bad person in my heart, and I knew I was. I'd never taken drugs, I'd never slept around or anything like that. I was basically a pretty good boy in terms of the world's standards. But the truth was, in my heart was black. I hated, I lusted, I broke every one of the 10 commandments, if not in my heart, then literally lying, disrespecting my parents. And I realized that violation of God's law is the thing that condemned me and cut me off from God. And that's why I had no sense of him. And I needed to get back into that relationship with my creator. And the only way that could happen is for my sin to be forgiven. And of course, finding out that Jesus died on the cross as a substitute for my sin. He took my place, so to speak. And there's a lot of theology behind that, but it's really simple in the sense of I deserve the judgment, and Jesus took that judgment upon himself for me so that I can come back in a relationship with God. When I realized that whole thing, I basically said, okay, I'm in. It's truth. I had no big emotional experience. I didn't speak in tongues. I didn't, there was no.
How old were you at this point?
I was like 17,
okay.
And I'm like, you know what? It's truth. I just, when I heard it and finally understood it, I thought, this is truth, and I just need to follow Jesus. So I committed my life to him, and I didn't. Like I said, I was a pretty good person by most people's standards, so it's not like my life had to change around. However, I noticed within the next few years, I started to change from the inside out. And in other words, things that I used to do and say, whether it's the, cussing or the lusting or whatever, I would start to realize that this is not good, and I don't want to do this sort of thing, And I basically say that it's the Holy Spirit was changing me from the inside out, And eventually, I came to realize that being a part of God's kingdom is that eternal meaning that my soul had been longing for, and it's sort of like we all want to be special. We all want to be significant, right? And unfortunately, that drives so many of us to do things that make us stand out, or we want to be over other people. But really, the glory is learning to realize that the creator of the universe loves me and knows me and has a place for me in his kingdom, even if it's a small one, even if it's not even if I'm not Billy Graham or I'm Martin Scorsese, the filmmaker, it's like if I do my job unto him and I incarnate messages of truth that point to God and his kingdom in my storytelling and such, then that's the meaning I was searching for. That's the eternality that my soul was craving. Because when I die, that message goes on to other people and saves them from their sin later on, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm part of that kingdom that God is growing on the earth. And when you realize that's the bigger thing that I'm a part of, that gave me that sense of meaning and eternity, and that I was searching for, Mm-hmm. And I mean, I still have my struggles in life and such, and of course, life isn't perfect. But in fact, I would say in a very real sense, I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve when I first set out going to Hollywood and making movies. I've made movies, mm-hmm. and I'm proud. I'm grateful that every project I've worked on is something I really believe in. But I think that that's part of the cost, is that when you're not willing to sell out, you want to do things meaningful, you don't always end up getting the biggest jobs. And so I never got that significance.
You got to have the experience. So, I mean, for me, it was actually this year, a comedy came out called Sleeper Agent, and I was executive producer on that. Yeah. And that was the first time being able to go through the whole process to me, that was just a dream come true, just being part of, the movie making experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, it's a lot of work, though, too. But
it is.
So the thing is, though, now I'm making movies. I'm still making movies. They're all little independent movies. They're not big Hollywood blockbusters. But I'm more happy and more satisfied because these movies are about truth.
Yes.
And they're about change in this world. And I'm proud of them. And I'm excited. And I'm just a small part of what God's plan is, what he's doing with my movies. And that's okay with me. And
you don't know the ripple effect. And you don't know the ripple effect on what those, documentaries or movies or whatever are doing.
Absolutely.
That's the incredible part when it comes to God's kingdom.
Yeah, I still get people, telling me, 200 Wars is my favorite movie of all time. And it's changed my life. In fact, I found out that there was this ministry called Cloud and Fire Ministries out in LA. And they were using the movie as part of their sort of training or processing of, they were taking guys who are I don't know what you call them, ex-cons, whatever, they get out of jail, and then they give them the schooling and they try to process them and give them some psychological help to be able to re-enter into the world, And they show the movie 200 Wars as part of their anger management process, and how to deal with forgiveness. And it's just because the movie is really about forgiveness, which is the hardest thing to do. And so, I hear about those things all the time. But interesting thing that happened along the way was, and this leads to my second career, so to speak. I'm doing both of them now, but so we're talking 11 years ago or something like that. I came up with a great idea to do a movie about a Bible character that would actually be Hollywood blockbuster. Hollywood would love it. And Christians and religious people would love it because it had this mixture of sort of the grand, epic, ancient world, but also it would have monsters and beings because of the research I'd done. And that movie, that story was Noah Primeval. And I wrote the script and I started shopping it around. And I'm a little guy, so I didn't have any big connections. And, they're not likely to make a movie from a little guy. But nonetheless, I found out Darren Aronofsky was making his movie on Noah. So I thought, too late. So he'll probably make the movie. And I thought, you know what? I want to get my story out before he does so that no one thinks I'm derivative. So I decided, get it out, write it as a novel. So I wrote the novel within a year or so, got it out before his movie even came out. And sure enough, his movie was not at all like mine. I was worried that it might have some similarities, but it really didn't.
A lot of controversy around that film, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now he did have some interesting things in there, like Methuselah, and he did have the Watchers, but the way he dealt with it was not the way I dealt with it.
He made Noah look like a crazy man. I'm telling you, man, it was insane.
And God was evil, basically, because God wanted him to. Yeah. God was telling him to kill someone,
Yeah.
And so, it forced me to do that, and I never really thought I would be a novelist. But what happened was, when I wrote it as a novel, this was right when Kindle was starting to blow up on Amazon, and my novel did really well and started making me money. And I'm like, I really needed the help because I had a couple of bad years, as everyone does, a couple of low income years. And I'm like, I got to do something to make money. And I'm like, well, this is making me money. So I decided, and I realized, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this story throughout the whole Bible that I have to tell. And I thought, I might write it. I might write as many as 4 more novels. Well, it ended up being an 8-novel set, and then I've got another 3-novel set and another 4 or 5-novel set. That they're all connected.
Wow.
So the truth is this understanding was it was related to what Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, was very influential to me. Before it was even published, I got a chance to read it. He was putting it on the internet, and that was where I was introduced to the divine council worldview and the notion of the Nephilim and the giants and the Watchers, and exactly what they were biblically. And it finally gave the answers that I'd been craving for a long time in my Christian life. There was always these weird passages throughout the Bible. And of course, the number one weird passage for me was Genesis 6, 1 through 4, where it talks about before the flood, the sons of God, these angelic divine beings came to earth, mated with women and had Nephilim
with the daughters
giants.
of men, right? With daughters of men.
Yeah.
It's a very intriguing verse that just kind of skims over and you're like, what was that? You kind of go back.
And it's so weird that when you think of, if you look a little bit into it, you find out what? Giants? Angels having sex with women? What?
Yeah.
And then you just sort of like move on because it's just too weird. And I would just file that in my someday to find an answer for, or maybe never.
There's
because,
only two ways to go on that. There's the sons of Seth, or there's, the viewpoint that you take. And really, it all falls apart when you get into sons of Seth, right? So really, that's the only logical explanation, but people don't like to talk about it. Like you said, it's just that's just too weird.
Yeah. And well, there's another good attempt, and that's called the, I don't know what they call it, but Meredith Kline sort of heralded it, and it was the view where it's called the divine king's view, where they thought of themselves as divine and such. And there's actually some argument for that case, but if you study the concept of the Nephilim and the Watchers throughout the whole Bible, you'll see that no, there's a very strong thread, theological thread, that very clearly does denote that Nephilim are literally giants and sons of God are not, metaphors or people who consider themselves to be divine kings.
Well, there were giants. I mean, I think everyone will agree on that, right? It's just when it comes into the Nephilim, that's where people, start kind of going different directions. And in your understanding, they were there to completely pervert. Really, it was the battle for your soul. All throughout, we see the Bible, but even in the collections of your work, it seems like you kind of hit on that same theme, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's your Chronicles series, everything you touch on really is that entire battle, that spiritual battle that's waging.
Yeah, it really is. And, for me, what I wanted to do with my novels was I wanted to retell Bible stories wherever these giants or watchers came up. And there's a lot more in there than we realize. Sometimes it's hidden in the translation. And I don't mean that in esoteric or a Gnostic way. I just simply mean that, because the translators don't know how to translate words, so they just Nephilim, for instance. The word Nephilim is a transliteration. The word actually means giants, okay? But the problem is that they don't want to translate it that way, because it makes it seem like, well, looks like Greek myth, right? So they say Nephilim, and then people interpret that to mean other things. But the truth is that if you do a study on it and its connection with the Aramaic language and such in the Bible, you'll find that no, it actually does mean giants. And so because of that, there are other passages where these things show up, and we all know Goliath, right? So it's okay, I can accept Goliath, but how many people know that there's several Bible verses that talk about 5 other giants who were hunting David? I bet people don't know that, right? But they were. And Lami, Goliath's brother, was one of them. And it says that they were giants and they were hunting him. And David's mighty men ended up killing them. But so when I got to the David novel, David Ascended, I thought, well, what's the story I'm going to tell? Am I going to tell about David and Bathsheba, because that's what everyone. No. I actually didn't even get to the David and Bathsheba story. That's later, because I dealt with this after he kills Goliath, how these 5 giants are now after him and how they're hunting him down. And so I take a unique take in my Bible stories, but I make it as I have a high regard for the Bible as Scripture, as the Word of God. And I try to tell stories that in between the facts that we know, right? So I try to stay true to the facts of the Bible that we do know, but I try to fill in between those stories to have it make sense, and particularly all the strange, bizarre things, how they can make sense, but in a fictional way too, So I also pull back the curtain and I try to show the supernatural world. So there's 2 stories going on in all my novels. There's the story of the human side of things, and then there's the story of the supernatural or the Watchers.
Now, when you're talking about the other 5, like giants chasing David, are you talking about extra biblical books? Or are you talking the Bible?
No, I'm talking literally the Bible.
See, that's something that passed by me, because I'm like, what? Really? It's there? And you're like, yeah, it's there.
Yeah, let me get.
Maybe for people that are listening in, if you could kind of maybe bring out that verse, that'd be great, or someone could just fact check it.
Absolutely.
I believe you, obviously, but see, that's what I mean is a lot of people, hear that main story and it kind of they gloss over, something else that was going on. And so what you've done is you've expanded on what possibly could have been happening, while these giants were chasing David.
Absolutely. So here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, cool.
So,
cool.
1 Chronicles 20:4-8. And after this, there arose war with the Philistines at Gezer. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sippai. Sippai is a giant. It says, Sippai, who was one of the descendants of the giants. Now, the Hebrew there is actually a little bit more than that. It's very interesting. And my book goes into that, but let's just keep it on the surface right now. So he was one of the descendants of the giants. And the Philistines were subdued, and there was war again with the Philistines. And Elhanan struck Elhanan struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So his brother was just as big. And there was again war at Gath. So all these Philistine wars that keep coming up, it talks about these giants who rise up. And it says, there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he was also descended from the giants. This is the one verse, actually, the only verse in the Bible that talks about the 6 fingers, 6 toes. But that's where all the Nephilim, mythology that we have, that's where it comes from. That. So there's good reason to believe that some of them may have had that, right? But then it's not even done. It says, when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by his servants. And that's not the only place. 2 Samuel 21, 16 through 22. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, another giant, thought to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. And it goes on and on. And so these are passages that are in the Bible, and you see how there's a coordination going on here. So yeah, we don't tend to catch that. We just sort of read it and gloss over it. I don't know, but I'm focusing on those because I think that in the end, the whole concept of giants is not just a weird anomaly of history or anomaly of the Bible. Oh, they're giants, or maybe even just they're giants because it was angels mating with women. There's actually a theological thread of what these giants represent, ultimately to the point where they are in Canaan. So when Joshua crosses into Canaan, God actually tells him to wipe them out. So this was the wars of the holy wars that we hear about. All the places where he was supposed to. When we hear about the holy wars, we think, isn't that genocide because they're supposed to kill everybody, man, woman, and child? Well, no, actually, there's only specific cities and tribes that they were to kill everybody, and they were tribes that had giants. Now,
correct.
Giants,
and that's a huge thing, too, because I think a lot of people that first get in the Bible, they start reading the Old Testament, and they're like, it just seems crazy that, all these things, all these people were being slaughtered, and when you start understanding that it was almost like a messing with the seed, like it was, then it starts making a lot more sense. I mean, to me, it was a huge eye opener when I started understanding the Old Testament a lot better. When I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute, that does make sense, right? There was something that was tainted. There was something that was not human anymore. Really, truly, was not God's creation. It was kind of a mix of it. Now, I'd love to get into your take on the Nephilim and all of this, because obviously there's different viewpoints here, right?
Yes.
Yes. And that's what I think is important for you to kind of state, where maybe you differ from maybe other teachers like Rob Skiba or other things like this, or just, how you see things. For example, like, do they still exist? Were they all wiped out? I mean, were they on the ark? I mean, it's really intriguing when you start getting into it. Like, are they even gone, right? So maybe you could kind of explain a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people, especially my listeners, they're going to be very well versed when it comes to Nephilim, as far as different things they've read or watched, and maybe you can kind of take a different take on it, obviously, because you differ with different things. But maybe we'll get into that a little bit, just because I know that your Chronicles series touches on the Watchers, maybe the difference between the Nephilim and the Watchers. Maybe just get into that whole thing as far as summing up that trilogy that you. I guess it's that you have explaining
trilogy of series.
A trilogy of series, exactly. We can go through. I want to go. We have quite a bit of time, so we could kind of maybe start with that, because we're on it. Maybe explain that, what you touch on, what you found intriguing in your research, and then we'll go from there. We'll get into your other pieces of work.
Yeah, because I'm definitely in the Michael Heiser's camp. If anyone knows anything about Michael Heiser, I'm definitely in his camp. So he's a scholar, and he believes that Nephilim are giants and the Watchers and all that. But we don't take it to the extremes that I would argue some of what I call the Nephilim nuts of today do. So, and one of those, for example, might be, this notion that there's like giants that are like 25 feet tall and 35 feet tall, and and they take their cue from, in my opinion, they take their cue from obviously figurative poetic statements like, the sons of the Ammonites, I think it was in one of the chapters. They're the size of oak trees, and it's like, well, therefore they are literally the size of oak trees, 30, 40 feet high, And these are what I call the hyper literalists who just don't understand the poetic nature of the language of the Bible. That's just all throughout. And no, that's saying they're very tall people, right? But the only couple places where sizes of the giants are mentioned in the Bible are two places. One is Goliath, right? And it says it's 9.5 feet tall. And the other one is in 1 Chronicles 11, and verse 23, it says, an Egyptian man of great stature, 5 cubits tall. And a cubit was about 1.5 feet. So that makes him, 7.5 feet, right? Mm-hmm. So, but there's an interesting thing, because in the Septuagint and in some versions, the definition of the height of Goliath is actually in question. And it's possible there are, I believe it's the Septuagint or some of the translations of other copies of the Old Testament that we have actually indicate that Goliath might have been more like 6.5 feet tall. And that's
so basically my height. I'm 6'7".
Yeah, but here, think about this. This is one of my constant refrains that goes into everything, eschatology, everything is, we read biblical English translations of English words, and we impose our bias of our culture onto them. So when we read giants, descendant of the giants, what do we think? Well, we think of Jack and the Beanstalk, right? We think of those giants like 30, 40 feet tall. That's a giant. Mm-hmm. But no, that's not necessarily a giant. If you've got a land where men are, on the average 5.5 inches, or I'm sorry, 5.5 feet tall, because mm-hmm. they were smaller than we are today, mm-hmm. 1.5 feet would be considered a giant. It's a large person. Mm-hmm. It just simply means a very large person. So these giants are very large people. Yeah, but the average is like around 7.5 feet or something like that. And that's the highest. And then there are, I have actually chronicled other ancient references to giants. Like there's an Egyptian reference in some execration texts that talk about these giants, and it's only about 7.5 feet tall. So I would argue that, and I'm in the camp that's like, no, they're not 35 feet tall. They're basically, it's like tribes of large people, and but that's still very significant, right? Sure. That's not discrediting the Bible at all. It's just the word giants, like the word earth, it's another one we can get into later when, when we read the word earth, English earth in the Bible, we're thinking the globe, and no, they didn't think that at all. Yeah. It's more like dirt or land. Yeah. And so there's a lot of these that I think blind us. So I'm in a camp that believes that. So it's large people, but they're not 35 feet tall and all that kind of stuff. And also, so I think there's a danger because there's also, in part of the Nephilim crowd, people are questioning, are there Nephilim today, which would be hybrids who are evil. And that's really dangerous in today's world because I think that is. But can the Nephilim be redeemed? That's the question, right? Because the joke, there is that the joke around too. My crowd, because I am very tall. I'm a redeemed Nephilim because I'm very tall, right? So I'm 6'7". So I mean, it's Well, the one it certainly is a question that I have no problem asking. In fact, I do so in my novels, like David Ascendant, and I struggle with that very issue. And I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything in the Bible that says anything about that. However, I do know that the only context of Nephilim or giants is negative. But if it has human, here's the argument. I don't want to debate this, but it's intriguing, right? If there is part human in the Nephilim, can Christ redeem anything that is human? Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good argument, right? Saying, what couldn't Christ redeem? No, absolutely. I have no problem, agreeing that that's a possibility. In fact, I do that in my novel. So, but to say doctrinally or dogmatically, we don't really know. So, we don't, but all we do know is that they're only in the negative in the Bible, at least for the purposes of the Bible. That's true. Just like the Ammonites and some of these other, tribes are only, the Anakim is basically the word for the giants, and there's a lot of Anakim. I don't have 6 fingers or 6 toes, so I'm okay. I'm just all joking. Yeah. Yeah, but But the idea, though, is that there's a particular theological messaging going on in the Bible. And I do think that it does go back to what you've already hinted at, which is what I call the war of the seed. And, when you go back to Genesis 3 and you read the curse on the serpent, and God says, your seed will be at war or at enmity with the seed of the woman. Mm-hmm. And most scholars will tell you that that's the first. That's
like the proto-evangelium, I think it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the first reference to Messiah, because Messiah is ultimately the seed of the woman, right? And so I do think that there's this probably something behind this. This doesn't have a biblical verse behind it, but the context seems to me to indicate that the angels in the Bible, I'm calling them angels for lack of a better word.
Sure.
The sons of God, the watchers that came down and had sex. Mm-hmm. Basically what they were doing was, Jude talks about how, and Peter talks about how they violated their abode, their separation. Mm-hmm. So in other words, heavenly beings were not supposed to mingle with, humans. They were supposed to be separate. And so in doing that, in violating that order, that's where they violated God's commands. Now, what's the whole point of that? Well, the point of the Bible, if you look at the law of God, it has to do with separation of the holy from the profane. Mm-hmm. And all of Israel's, laws, not all, but many of them had to do with separation, So it was all about separating the Jew from the Gentile, mm-hmm. because they were God is setting apart his people for salvation, etc. So a lot of the Bible, think about it, even the creation ordinances, it's separating, right? Separating light from day, separating the water from the land. Yep. So there's this notion where they're applying the notion of holiness or separation is an essential element of creation. So for the sons of God to violate that separation is an unholy bastardization. So it's not a racial, in the context of the Bible, it's not a racial thing, because this is not race. This is heavenly and earthly, right? Correct. So whereas race is different colors of people or whatever, so it's not a racial thing technically, but I fear that people believing it still is today, it can become that. But so I do believe it goes back to that. So I think that they were trying to, probably one of their plans was to, since they could see that there was a promise of the seed of the woman, they wanted to corrupt the seed of the woman, mm-hmm. and that would stop the Messiah from coming. And by the time of Noah, when it says Noah it says he was a righteous man, but he was pure in his days. Well,
which only makes sense if it's, and exactly, I've always looked at that verse, pure. It has to be something like separate, because there was no one that was sinless at that time.
Yeah. And so this is probably, it's in reference to that whole intermingling of angels. In other words, Noah was pure in that ritual.
Well, the flood makes more sense, right? Because,
Absolutely.
People being wicked and marrying and drinking, you're kind of like, then we're in a lot of trouble. If that's the prerequisite before judgment on a worldwide scale, you're kind of like, something else must have been going on. And it is intriguing how Jesus, does say, as the days of Noah, so it will be again. And I'd love to get it in your take on that, because I've always looked at it like something's going to be happening with commingling. Yeah, let's do that.
We'll get there. We got 2 hours.
Sounds good. Keep going.
But we're getting there. I definitely have a direction where I'm going with this too. And so I call it the War of the Seed. And my whole Chronicles and Nephilim series is that. Every story, whether it's David, Enoch, Abraham, I've got Abraham allegiant, I have David ascended. It goes all the way up to Jesus triumphant. And it's basically, it's the story of how that supernatural world is trying to stop the seed. Sometimes they find out who it is, like David, and they know, he's in the seed line of the Messiah, so they try to kill him. That's what the giants were trying to do, see? So it's this battle between the seed, and that's what the giants are connected to, and that's why Joshua has to wipe them out. But here, there's an interesting element going on here, and this is where I begin to differ from, probably the more a speculative camp, and that is that so David, in the time of David, first of all, Joshua was commissioned to wipe them all out, and it said he wiped them all out, except in chapter 11, I think it says he wiped the Anakim out from all the land, and the Anakim are the giants that come from the Nephilim. So there's a connection in the Bible. It makes a connection between the Anakim of Canaan to the Nephilim before the flood, indicating that they're evil, right? And so obviously we have an issue there with, is the flood global or not? But I try to cover all theories in my books so that people can appreciate no matter what view you have. But nonetheless, so each of those, they're trying to stop the seed. Now, by the time of David, or by Joshua, it says Joshua got rid of them all except in the land of Philistines. He left them in the land of Philistines. And then what does David have to do? He has to fight Goliath, Mm-hmm. And so Goliath represents that leftover that Joshua did not finish. He was supposed to finish it off. And then you see David basically finishing up the Rephaim. By the time of David, the Anakim are called Rephaim. And it's just there's a whole linguistic history behind the meaning of these words. We could talk about that, but keep it on the surface right now. It's basically the same name for the same thing. The Rephaim were the giants. And David wipes them out. So after David, you never hear anything more about giants in the Bible. And who is David? The anointed king, the Messiah. Literally, the name is Messiah King. So David was the Messiah King, of whom the son of David would be the Messiah for all the world. And so the Messiah of all the world would do something similar to what David did. And I'll explain how I think that works. But so you never hear anything about giants. So theologically speaking, they've been taken care of. Mm-hmm. They're done away with biblically. David did it. However, by the time of Jesus, when Jesus is the Messiah coming to the land, the son of David, all this demonic activity starts happening. And you don't read about any of it at all in the Old Testament, maybe once or twice here or there. All of a sudden, Messiah comes and all these demons are just going crazy. Mm-hmm. Why? What's going on? Well, the Bible never says where demons come from. They just call them evil spirits. And most people, most Christians even, sort of think sloppy. They think that demons are fallen angels, right? But they're not. Fallen angels are actually spirit beings that have angelic flesh. They have a kind of flesh.
Correct.
Jude talks about this.
Yep.
It's different than ours, but it is a flesh. They can eat food. They can have sex with humans, right?
Is your take spirits are basically the embodied spirits of the Nephilim?
Yes, the demons.
That's
are
what my
just
train of thought is too. Yeah,
seeking for body.
Correct.
But they are, but here's the thing. This is where the Book of Enoch is the place that talks a lot about this. It says that the demons are the spirits of the dead Nephilim, and to me, I'm not going to say that that's scriptural, but I'm going to say that that may very well be what it is, because it makes the most theological sense to me. Because what that means is, David wiped him out, and the flood wiped him out, but the spirits, some of their spirits, or all their spirits, are still wandering the earth. So that when Jesus comes into the promised land to cleanse it for Messiah, he has to throw out the demons who are the spirits of the Nephilim. So he's doing the same thing David did, but in the spiritual realm. But it's not a physical realm. It's not a physical giants. Mm-hmm. It's the spiritual realm. So he's cleansing the land for the arrival of Messiah. And that's why you have all that demonic activity going on, right? Mm-hmm. So when people talk about, are there Nephilim today and stuff, I don't think there are. I don't believe that there are. And I think it's a dangerous thought to think that way, because in a sense, I would argue that to have that in your theology is to, whether you, let us say wittingly or not, you are denying the gospel, because the gospel is that when Messiah comes, he does conquer all that. And so if you think that
so let's backtrack for a sec. So again, when you said when Jesus comes, he's done away with it. Are you saying that evil spirits are done away with?
No, but he definitely cleansed the Holy Land from them, and he had the final victory over them at the cross.
That is true. Yes, that is true.
So I do think that I suspect that there is still demonic activity going on. Okay. Yes, I do, but no giants.
Gotcha.
I don't see any.
Well, you don't see it.
I don't see any biblical basis from.
Well, you see a lot of basketball players. You do see a lot of basketball teams, and they're like 7 foot, plus.
But that doesn't mean they're Nephilim.
Correct. No. They don't have six toes.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, so that's where I'd be a heretic to that crowd. But in fact, it's interesting because I was on a paranormal, we call it Paranormal, a podcast with Michael Heiser and some other of us who are in his camp, where we look at we look at scholarly papers that deal with these odd supernatural things to deal with, in other words, how does the scholarly community deal with them? And they tend to try to, prove them, empirically or whatever. And one of our issues was this whole Rh negative blood factor, is it part of the, giants or whatever? And, we had a whole podcast issue on that. And we concluded that no, there's no connection to Nephilim or anything. But so I'm in that camp where, there may be demons, there may still be demonic activity, but I don't think there are giants that have anything to do with anything in today's world. I don't. But there's also another side to that, and that is the Watchers. And so the other element that I bring into all my novels as well is what we call the divine council worldview. And this is another component of the whole thing we've been talking about, Nephilim, giants, and all that, and that's the Watchers. So these sons of God, who are they? Well, as I'm sure your audience knows, I won't belabor the point, but Deuteronomy 32, 8-10 is a classic verse. There's a lot more verses, but that's the verse where it talks about how. In fact, I'll just read it real quickly.
Sure.
When the Most High, so this is Moses is writing about this, and they're in the land of Canaan, and he's looking back to Babel. He says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion, Yahweh's portion, is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. So what's going on there is this idea that at Babel, when God separated the nations, he basically separated the Gentiles from what would be his people eventually in Jacob, with Abraham, of course. Abraham was a little bit later, but that separation was occurring. And it says he fixed the borders according to the number of the sons of God. And it says the Most High gave the nations their inheritance. What is this? Well, in the ancient world, this notion of inheritance was you would inherit land. This is why the Bible talks a lot about the various tribes inheriting their land, right? Well, they believed that the ancient world believed that over the nations, and specifically over the rulers and authorities in the nations, there were spiritual authorities over them. The Apostle Paul called them principalities and powers. See, that's not demons, that's Watchers. And that's where I wanted to make the distinction, where demons are kind of like, I don't know, maybe shock troops or like, little cells of terrorists or whatever. But the generals and the organizers, they are the Watchers. And they are different beings. And this is, the sons of God are the Watchers. They are the ones that Daniel talks about, where the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, in other words, they had this belief that over these earthly authorities, there were spiritual authorities. So whatever happened on earth happened in heaven. If there was a war on earth, there was a war going on in heaven. And if Babylon was overthrown, you read language about the stars falling from the sky, and they believe stars were gods. And so it's very much linking that supernatural fall with the earthly fall as well. So this is kind of how they understood it. And everyone in the ancient world had that notion. But the Bible in specificity, its argument was, and I'll simplify it like this: God was separating and saying, I'm going to choose my people and give them a land and give them a heritage, but I'm going to leave all the Gentile nations. Because think about it. What was the Tower of Babel? God just judged the earth, let it grow, come back, and what did mankind do again? Mankind just turned right around and ended up worshiping themselves and, building the tower to the heavens, which was a religious ziggurat, right? Sure. And so the whole point of Babel is man keeps falling back into idolatry. So God is saying, okay, look, if you're going to keep worshiping these false gods, I'm going to give you over to them. And those are the sons of God. I'm going to give you over to them. They will be your inheritance. They will be your rulers and authorities. But I'm going to keep a people. I'm going to be the God of my people. You're going to follow those gods. So in a very real sense, the Bible is confirming that over these Gentile nations, they have these, you could call them demonic principalities, in the sense of demonic as meaning evil, right? And they're this is why later on in Deuteronomy, he says, verse 17, they the Israelites, when they fell away, they sacrificed to demons that were not God, to gods they had never known. So the Bible is saying that these now the word demons is not quite the same as what we would call demons, but shedim, which is sort of like the evil spirit sort of thing. But he's saying that these gods that they worshipped are actually evil supernatural beings of some kind. What that looks like, We don't always know. The Bible doesn't tell us much. So I fictionalize that through my novels in the best way that I can. And, some other people have different ideas. But that's the basic principle. But this is all connected to Messiah. Because, so I've written a book called Psalm 82. You can get on Amazon. And I basically go through Psalm 82, which is a description of this very thing that I just started to talk about. But it not only does it describe that there is these watchers, these sons of God over the nations, but they're responsible for them in a very real sense. Not only that, it talks about their judgment, and it's connected to when Messiah comes. So when you read Psalm 82, you see God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted. Rescue the the needy and the weak. In other words, God is saying you were an authority over them and you were supposed to watch over them, but you didn't. Verse 5, they have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. And then this classic phrase that Jesus quoted, I said you are gods, sons of the Most High. There it is. Most High is a name for God, El Elyon. So the sons of God are the sons of the Most High, same thing. All of you, nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. So the idea here is that, and I explain this in the book, Psalm 82, is that because these watchers over the nations were given the responsibility they were given as the inheritance to these peoples, right? But they were demonic. They were evil. They ruled unjustly, and therefore God's going to judge them. And how is he going to judge them? By ultimately they're going to die. Yet they're supernatural beings, but their judgment is that they're going to die like a man. So in other words, our assumption is that supernatural beings just exist, live on forever. Well, these aren't going to, because they're going to be punished. And the key to this to understanding when that occurs. So the question is, when does that occur? And I know that a lot of people in the, prophecy speculation camp and stuff have all these theories about that. And the watchers are still here and they're still ruling over nations and stuff. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that the watchers are here anymore. There may be demons, but there are not watchers. And the reason why is because the Bible says that. In the last verse of Psalm 82, and it's not the only place, there are many other references, but verse 8, it says, Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. So that verse where it says that the Gentile nations are inherited by the gods, now he's saying God will inherit the nations. But who inherits the nations? Psalm 2, Messiah. Messiah is the one. So this is talking about Messiah. And the word in Greek for arise is aneste, which is the same word that Paul always says when he quotes arise in the Old Testament. He's saying that's a reference to the resurrection of Jesus. So my argument is that verse 8 says that the judgment of these watchers occurs when Messiah rises from the dead, and that's when he inherits the nations. And that's the gospel. When Messiah comes, and this is throughout the whole Bible, when Messiah comes, he would take back the inheritance of the nations that were under these watchers. He would take them back. And remember how in the Old Testament, only Israel knew God, but all the other nations were just in darkness.
Correct.
Well, now with the gospel, what does the gospel always say? It says, now people of every tribe and nation can come, and every tongue, every tribe, every nation, because Jesus took away their authority and took away their inheritance. Now the people from the nations are flooding into the kingdom of God, and that's the whole point.
So you no longer believe that Satan is the god of this world, correct?
Correct.
Okay, cool. I want to get into that in an hour or two for sure, because that would be very intriguing. Because obviously you still agree that evil exists and all that.
Yes.
And we'll get into that. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We're coming back for hour 2. Brian Godawa, and this is episode 96. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven, Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hello, Karl Marx here. Look at my wonderful hair. Notice how I sweep it back.
Carl?
I call it the 360 sweep. Beard, sideburns, and the magnificent coif.
Carl!
What? What is this?
You're on the radio. They can't see you.
Oh, yeah, I get confused.
Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.B. Bork, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back. Welcome back at Celebrate Truth Radio. We got to echo. Always after the break. Brian, maybe you can just say something and it will go away.
Say something.
Yeah, sometimes it goes away right away. Anyways. There it's gone. No, it's not.
No. Oh, now it is.
I think it's gone now. So yeah, we're getting into some interesting things when it came to the fact that you don't believe that that Satan is the God of this world anymore. And then my question to you was that the Watchers have been destroyed.
Yes.
The Nephilim have been killed. The disembodied spirits as demons or evil spirits or whatever.
They may still be around.
They still live. Okay, so then the question is, how do they affect kind of current events? Do they work with evil men? What's the interaction between spirits and men now in this day and age?
Well, that's a good question. As you're pointing to, what I'm arguing might cause a lot of people who do believe in the supernatural as well to say, well, that's crazy because there's obviously supernatural evil going on in this world. I mean, look at what's going on in our country right now. That's supernatural evil. And I don't doubt that, there's a certain level in which I agree with that. But
there is wicked. I mean, the wicked, depraved heart is capable of enough by itself. And I've always held that. A lot of people love to give, the devil and the spirits all this credit. But really, man's heart and depravity knows no bounds, really. And I mean, the Bible's full of it. And it can get pretty wicked, turning its heart against God. That's exactly my argument. So, and then, there could be demons, but the way the Bible depicts demons, they don't seem to be very organized or cohesive or, they're sort of random, just wild, crazy things. You know what I mean? Because obviously you do work, and this is something maybe to bring up. Obviously you do a series on Revelation with Jared Chrestman, which, I've had both of you on the show before. I had Jared on last week, but you do know that Jared operates, as far as when it comes to spiritual warfare, when it comes to, these type of things, as far as manifestations. So I'm sure you guys have had some pretty interesting talks. I'm not sure if you hold to the same view, but it would be interesting to find out, I guess for everyone listening in where you are. I mean, I love having guests on that are completely outside the norm. I have no problem having controversial people on my show all the time. I think it's worthwhile, and it's important for people to start, not just thinking one direction, really, be challenged and do your own research. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I have not explored the world, the demonic reality in today's world type of thing. That's not I tend to focus more on the ancient world, and I just don't know much about that. But I'm willing to acknowledge and admit that there's demonic activity going on. So, but what I won't agree with, though, is that there is those who believe that there are watchers over Islam and over these nations and such, and they're causing all this great evil. And like you said, from a practical standpoint, it's like, you know what? Man does not need demons to do the most horrendous genocides of all time. So they're technically not needed. But more importantly, my argument is biblical. I'd like to believe there are watchers because it'd be a way to explain it, right? But the truth is, I believe it because what I think the Bible is saying. And by the way, the first thing that people will immediately say is, well, wait a minute, so Psalm 82 says that the resurrection is when Christ not only inherits the nations, because people will sometimes say, well, that's the now and the not yet. So he destroyed them in a sense, and in a sense he disinherited them, but in a sense they're still around. So now we have the gospel is the power of God over them while they're still there. And I can accept that as a possible a way of understanding it, except it goes against the text. The text actually says they're going to die. That their judgment of the watchers is that they will be destroyed and they will die. And that's connected to the inheritance of the nations and the resurrection of Jesus. And the other thing is that Paul, and I do think like I need to just address this real quickly, because people also say, well, what about the New Testament? It says Satan is the god of this world, right? It says Satan is going around like a roaring lion, right? How can you say that? And here's the problem is that, the New Testament is saying that because the New Testament was all written before AD 70. AD 70 was the destruction of the temple. The temple was the incarnation of the Old Covenant. So the Old Covenant concept was still basically earthly in effect. Jesus died on the cross and he brought the new covenant, but the old covenant was not fully done away with until the old covenant incarnation was destroyed, the temple. They were still engaging in sacrifices and such like that. But the point there was that old, in an earthly historical sense, the old covenant is not fully eliminated until that temple is destroyed. So when Paul was writing in that first century, he was in an interim period, a transition period between covenants. The new covenant had come in with the death of Christ, right? AD 33 or whatever. And then 70 or 40 years, there was until the temple was destroyed. And that was the final culmination of what Christ came to do. He came to save the lost and judge those who rejected him. And so when Paul was writing, those authorities, the authorities were technically still around, the principalities and powers, because they hadn't been completely done away with. So there is a now and a not yet, and it was operating in that first century before AD 70. But the whole point is that
when that temple is destroyed, that is the end of the old covenant. And then that's when the finalization of their, of these watchers and their death occurs. Because Paul writes in Colossians 2, Jesus disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. And it's very important to understand that word triumph is a very specific technical phrase referring to the Roman triumph of victory. And what that was when the Romans would conquer a city or a people or whatever, they would capture or kill the leaders, tie them in a train or drag them in a train, dead or alive, behind them, and ride through the city they conquered. And it was sort of the triumph, or actually they would bring them to Rome and go through Rome as well. But and then ultimately they would take them, they would drag them through the city of Rome, saying, look at these were the, whatever, these tried to stand against us, but Caesar killed them or whatever. And then they would sacrifice them like at the altar of Jupiter. So the triumph ended in that final destruction and final death of whoever they triumphed over. So my point here is that Paul is saying that, Jesus is engaged in that triumph, and it began with the cross, and it was now and the not yet until AD 70, and then AD 70 was the yet. So by AD 70, that's the fulfillment of that concept of the triumph that ends in the death of the watchers. And that's why I argue that, to say that there are watchers today, they've been disinherited, but they're still around. It's like, no, I think that the whole point of the new covenant is that it completely obliterates all that old covenant stuff and everything that's connected to it, of which was the separation of the Gentiles and Jews, which was the watchers over the nations, right? The Gentile nations. Mm-hmm. So that the new covenant, replacing that old covenant, is precisely the point of what's happening there. So that's the theological reason why I don't believe they're watchers today. But I would acknowledge that there is demonic activity, and there could be people fueled by demons who are doing the great and evil things, but not everyone.
So pretty much all the watchers were ruling nations back in the Old Testament is what you... Yeah. They were given kind of that authority, and they basically ruled.
That watcher paradigm is part of the old covenant. Now, people, you might say, but it says that it occurred at Babel, and Babel was before, the allotment, that's what the phrase is, the allotment to the watchers was before the law of God. But the problem is with that is, but it's the codification of it was in the Mosaic law. Moses was the one who was explaining that theology, and he was embodying it within the law of the covenant that he was giving Israel. Because here's the other thing is that verse in Deuteronomy that's supposed to be referring to Babel. What does God say? It says, but Jacob I kept for myself. But there was no Jacob in the Tower of Babel. Yeah. There was no people of Israel in the Tower of Babel. Yeah. So God is projecting and looking forward in time and saying, this is how this is concept, and it's rooted in the Mosaic covenant. So that's why I think that the watcher allotment is part of the old covenant. So if the old covenant system is obliterated and replaced by the new covenant, there ain't no watchers, baby. However, sure, there could be demons and all that. And so there could be ways that we have to battle them. I'm not as involved in that world as Jared may have been in terms of the modern day world. So I try to focus more on the ancient world.
You're more on the Nephilim and the Watchers as far as that class. So certain classes, they're destroyed, like they're gone. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to
sure. Spirits. I mean, but like you said, I mean, if you think about it, I've acknowledged it many times that there's demonic evil going on in this world. Sure. But it's not the coordinated effort of the Watchers, the generals. Yes, the generals. And like you said, it's just. So make the argument
where's Satan now for you? Like
Satan is bound. And what that means is this. And I don't, by the way, I haven't worked everything out, all details. So
that's fine. It's fine. It's just good to throw it out there. Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah. But okay. So we talked about this on the last time when we explained that Jared and I are preterists and
you're partial preterists. You're partial preterist. Are you
partial
not?
Preterist.
Yes. You have to make that disclaimer for sure, just because when people, run to it, they're going to run to the extreme. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if at least you say a partial preterist, you're like, there are certain things future tense, not like someone that is a full preterist that believes that all of it has been fulfilled.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, and what that means is Revelation 20, which is like one of the crux of interpretation of the book of Revelation, yet it's also the most difficult, one of the most difficult passages in the Bible. And most scholars will admit that, there are multiple views, and you know what? You can't, all of them have some good arguments. Let's put it that way. So, but my view is, as I understand it, is that Satan was bound at that destruction of the old covenant with the coming of the new covenant. That's what Revelation is about. We've Jared and I have gone through a 15 episode.
I've linked to it in the description just for people that are on YouTube. If you want to check
Yeah.
it out, it is in the description. It is in the comments, as well as Brian's website and also his YouTube channel. So you can check that out if you're looking for any materials, including the Revelation study that you and Jared have done.
Yeah, and I know that that's shocking to some people. It's like, what? I've never, what? But you just have some patience.
Hey, it's 2021. It's like you can look into anything at this point, and
That's
maybe
true, true.
I think and here's the thing, and the reason I bring this up, Brian, why I think it's really important is there were so many people behind the idea that 100%, not just the prophets and Q and all that, just in general, this is the way it is. This is where we're at. Trump's going to win. And all of a sudden people are left surprised, and I think that's the show that Jared and I did wasn't just so much picking up the pieces. It was talking and saying, guys, we might be on the wrong track completely here, right? Yeah. So is it helpful and beneficial to just start looking at some other viewpoints,
Absolutely.
Do your own research. Don't just do it because everyone is on board with, this is it. We're at the beginning of the tribulation. Therefore, I believe we're there too, right? Maybe start looking at other views and do your own research on what computes, and just, obviously pray about it. But if it's the most biblical understanding, then take that. Don't just go based on what, all the prophecy books are saying. All the prophecy books are saying one thing, or all the Nephilim books are saying one thing. Well, wait a minute, do your own research. And that's why I'd like to have guests on that challenge the status quo sometimes when it comes to it. I'm not saying I agree with everything, and I don't need to. We're still brothers in Christ. We're still brothers in Christ.
Amen.
And
Amen. And we need more of that graciousness. Because,
well, that's why I stress on this channel all the time, because I get into all sorts of different topics, and I have beliefs that people would probably think are really crazy. But at the end of the day, we're still one in Christ. As long as the essentials are in place, don't worry, guys, about all this stuff. Sometimes it might really benefit your life, because a lot of times people are looking into certain ideologies or looking into certain doctrinal stances, and it's bringing nothing but fear and depression in their life. Sometimes you have to start looking at it. Well, wait a minute, the way Brian's saying, and it is true, Christ has conquered. He has conquered death. He has done this. Why in the world are you worried about the evil empire or the scary demons of this world or Satan himself? It's like there is no power that is greater than, he who is in the world. Sorry, he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world, And I think that's really important that we all stand by that understanding. No matter how crazy this world gets, Christ has conquered it.
Amen. And I do think that part of the problems of communicating with these very disparate views is that, and when people are so radically committed to their own view that they think other views are heresy, the problem is that you lose perspective, and like, now I lost my own track of thought here, but I've been called a heretic, all right, because of what I believe about Revelation. But there was a time when I was a dispensationalist, a left behinder, Yeah, and I believed that what I believe now was heresy. And so now I'm very slow to accuse someone of heresy. And I think I know what I wanted to get at was, we have to realize that what we are saying when we are sharing what we think the Bible is saying is our interpretation of the Bible, and we believe it's God's word, but we have to be humble enough to acknowledge that. And by the way, I still believe this for myself, is that maybe our interpretation is not the same as the Word of God itself. So there's two things: the Word of God, and that's God's word. It doesn't change, whatever. It's perfect. But our understanding of it may be wrong. But so often I see Christians mixing their interpretation as if it's God's word itself. And so, for example, when you say something like, the watchers are all gone, there are no more watchers, they immediately conclude, you're saying there's no more evil in the world. You're saying that all this evil, it's like, no. Mm-hmm. It's like, you've got to listen carefully to the other side. And I would just plead with people, take a look at preterism. And preterism, you don't have to agree with everything, but the thing about it is impartial preterism, if you want to be exact. But like checking out my books and stuff is that, there's a lot to learn from opposing views. And I still like to read other views that I don't agree with too. And just because I believe this now doesn't mean I'm close to changing my mind on it. But I do know this, is that the one thing that really impressed me about preterists was that they're very biblical in their arguments, and they're very historical, and they talk a lot about historical things that I haven't heard other Christians talk about. So I learned a lot about history from the preterists before I even, came to embrace the eschatology as well. And so, so my plea is let's try to honestly, I really mean this, honestly, try to understand an opposing side. Don't dismiss it or don't react against it as heresy. Just, try to understand it. And you don't have to believe it or agree with it, but at least honestly look at it. And I do agree with you, especially now, after all these years, and in the year 1000, they thought was the end of the millennium.
Well, 1948. I brought this up on our show, and I'll bring it up here again. But 1948. I mean, when I got saved, I was hardcore eschatology. I couldn't get enough of it. Right? I read all the books, and I was, pre-trib, rapture, the whole thing. But really what I was intrigued with was the date 1948. And I would imagine that it doesn't matter where you stand on the spectrum, even if you believe in the rapture, you don't, whatever, you still look at 1948 as significant because that's when, Israel came back, right? They became a nation. They got their identity, I think their flag in 62. But regardless, that 1948 date, I've just heard it continually up to present day. Everyone is looking at that 1948 date based on that, and they've stretched it, but they're running out of room to stretch. I mean, you can't really stretch a generation to like 140 years, right? I mean, you're already past, 40 years biblically or whatever it was. Now it's at about 80. I'm not sure where it's at, but again, we're running out of time. And I said this to Jared one time we were on the phone. I said, I think there's going to be a major crisis that's going to take place because at some point, all of those books, didn't matter where you stood. If you stood to the 1948 date and said, well, look, this is the marker, that generation will be the generation that sees this all take place. Well, guess what, guys? It didn't happen. Then what, right? Do you start doubting the Bible? And unfortunately, I think a lot of people will start turning away because maybe the Bible was wrong. And that, I think, is the most dangerous thing. By the way,
that supports what I'm saying. They'll think the Bible's wrong because they equated their specific interpretation with the Word of God itself without realizing this is my interpretation. I may be wrong, but this is what I think, right? And so because of that, they're confusing the two things. But you're right. That was one of the things that affected my life was, I looked at it and there are books like The Day and the Hour is a book by Francis Gumerlock, a really great book. And it chronicles basically all through history how so often premillennialists, futurists, people who believe, the Antichrist and the tribulation and all that is coming in our future. All throughout history, they've always believed it applied to their particular time. So, even if you just go back to the 70s and it's like Russia, communist Russia was going to be, the root of everything. Now,
but they were clearly wrong. But they were clearly wrong because they didn't have the technology. Because they didn't have the technology that our generation has. Our technology has the technology that can actually support some sort of mark in your right hand or forehead, and you can go beep beep. You can buy stuff with, right?
But my argument is that if you're honest with looking at the system, they've always been wrong. Always.
Yes, it is true.
And over. And basically, look back every 10 years and you'll read a book from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, whatever. It's true. You'll see that, in fact, go on YouTube. They've got The Late Great Planet Earth is on YouTube.
Oh, really?
I think it's still there. Nice. The movie. It is hilarious, but it shows you how completely, absolutely wrong they were. Yeah. And that guy's still around today teaching. Mm-hmm. So they just keep changing their views. And my argument is this. Okay, I get it. You can say, logically speaking, they've always been wrong, but now we're right. Technically, that's a logically valid argument. However, if you think holistically and think reasonably and rationally, maybe the fact that you've been wrong, your viewpoint has been wrong and changing every 10 years or so for hundreds of years. Maybe it's not the individual interpretations that are wrong. Maybe it's the system. That's all I'm saying is, so consider looking at these other systems, and not just preterism. Look at amillennialism.
Sure.
I don't care. Just look at something other than just the premillennialists, the futurists, whatever dispensationalists, whatever view you are, the left behind view.
I think, Brian, though, like the first thing, and coming from even myself, the minute you hear that, you're like, well, wait a minute, everything gets thrown out. Where are we then? Where are we? Or then, like, people almost need like an endpoint, right? They need to see this endpoint coming. They need to see signs that
That's fair.
So you have to understand the brain. It's almost a psychological thing where you're kind of like, you're thrown around and you're like, if we're just in limbo and we don't know where we are in that spectrum, how do we know exactly what we're to do? How do we know when evil's at a point when we're to be react? So I think maybe, and you can maybe talk a little bit about this, because that's what I find fascinating, talking to you or Jared. I mean, Jared's hardcore on, looking at everything that's going on in the world, how evil it's getting, communism coming in, all this. So it's not like you guys are just, so maybe talk about how you see current events taking part and what the Christian response is, like it has been before. But again, this whole idea, but be ready, obviously, because, today could be our last day. That's just a given. But really, I think it's this whole idea of being in limbo. How does a preterist look at it as far as someone that's really intrigued on watching current events, watching the degradation, the demoralization, just how bad things are getting? And I'm not talking, I was saying this to Jared the other night. I said, Jared, here's the big difference, right? And this is the only thing I can say. I see in recorded history that there has been pedophilia. I see that there's been bestiality. I see that there has been homosexuality. I see all these things in history. The one thing I do not see in history anywhere recorded is where men questioned if they were a woman or a man. Never. So what I'm saying is, where are we in that spectrum? This is my argument to you is, do you not agree though, we're at some sort of new level in all recorded history of depravity to the point where we're now advocating that 8-year-old children get sex change operations because they feel like a girl when they're born a boy. To me, I think that we're on some dangerous territory moving forward that I don't think it's ever existed before in recorded history.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you that we certainly might have a few things that are unprecedented, maybe in that sense. Absolutely.
Men never questioned it. Women never have questioned it ever through recorded history. So where are we? Where are we at the level of depravity or rebellion against God and his created order when we're now attacking literal male and female? To me, I think it is unprecedented. I think it's very scary to the level we've got. And I'm not talking just U.S. I'm talking the whole world, because this is getting filtered for the whole world, getting on board with this whole, critical race theory and all these things that they're trying to push. It's not just U.S., although U.S., America is the one that's peddling it to the rest of the world through Hollywood. And I mean, you've done a lot of extensive research on Hollywood, so I think you could talk quite a bit about what they have been trying to, their agenda. Again, people see it as like, okay, if this is an agenda, is it just evil men that are trying to just pervert the world? Are they trying to just take over the world? And where are they getting their marching orders from? Just their evil hearts? Or do they have certain people that they're tapping into in a spiritual sense, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, that's the first thing that people, if you tell them all, look, there's no future Antichrist in terms of prophecy. There's no future Antichrist, Great Tribulation, or Rapture. And it's like, so then the first thing is, then there's nothing to look forward to. Then there's nothing to look forward to. Then how can you say that, And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. It's a change of perspective. And we all know that a change of perspective can change everything if you're looking at it through different eyes. First, you have to say, well, what does the Bible say? Because, I would argue that I came to the belief that, the Great Tribulation was in the past and there is no future Antichrist, and that I came to that reluctantly. It was like I was.
Well, you used to be that. You used to be like someone that believed in the rapture, left behind, and you were.
I loved Hal Lindsey. I was
sure.
in that day when his book was hot. I was there. So my point is I remember experiencing that as well. It's like when it started to hit me that this is true, this has been fulfilled. I'm thinking, well, then what do I have to look forward to? And I soon came to realize, like, we shouldn't be looking forward to escape. It's never does the Bible, well, maybe not never. There are my Sodom and Gomorrah or something. But I mean, the Bible doesn't promise us that you're going to escape suffering or you're going to escape evil or whatever. It doesn't promise that. And I tell people that, okay, if there's no future Antichrist, that doesn't mean there's no future tyrants.
You are protected though from his wrath, right? We do see evidence of that with, a lot of examples. I mean, this is one argument I've made, even when I believed in the rapture. I didn't believe it was before. I thought it was, after the tribulation. I basically had transitioned outside in my viewpoint to that based on the fact that, judgment, I mean, Christians go under persecution. That's just a given, right? But when it comes to God's wrath being poured out on, you never see an example. I mean, even in Egypt, they were protected in Goshen, right? So, I mean, I still think that there was that difference between, I guess, judgment and God's wrath in the sense, or maybe you look at it a different way, but if God was to send wrath on evildoers, would his children or his people fall under that wrath?
Well, it's a hard thing to talk about because this world is a very integrated world, right? I mean, there's believers in every nation. And we're mixed in with unbelievers. So the truth is that, maybe some believers might suffer if there's wrath upon a nation. But I do know this. This is why I'm a little reticent to talk too strongly about God judging nations.
Well, it's okay because I'm like, I mean, my viewers, my listeners definitely know I've been 100%, and I know even talking to Jared even the other night, we still fall under the idea that this entire thing that started here in 2020 is God's judgment. Now, again, spiritually speaking, it has massive ramifications. I'm not going to get into the numbers and whether or not it literally is a pandemic. I don't think so as far as the numbers, but I think it is a spiritual pandemic, and I think it's a judgment that God's not sending just to one nation. He's sending to all the nations, and he's not pleased. So I believe that judgment has come personally. This is me, Robbie, saying this personally. I do believe that we have fallen under massive amount of judgment, and with Trump not getting in, and I'm not getting into politics, this is not about Trump or this is way bigger than that. What I'm saying is what we're seeing now is evil, complete evil communists take over America and the rest of the world. I think that is judgment. I think judgment has come and is going to continue across the nation. And we are going to fall under, oppression. We're going to fall under persecution. This is what I'm looking at. Now, people say, that is so doom and gloom. That is so negative. Why would we ever wake up and even be happy? The question is, God's kingdom still consists, the gospel, right? The Great Commission. There's a beautiful picture in that you see that throughout world history, and the church thrives in those times, right? The one thing that West has never experienced yet, and this is what I find interesting, the West has never experienced major persecution when it comes to, his people. Right. Guys, it's about to come, I believe. But guys, it's not a bad thing. Start looking at the persecuted church around the world. It is on fire in a good way, right? It is doing incredible things. So if anything, I look at it like it's an exciting time of history. I don't look at it like, oh my goodness, there's nothing to look forward to. But also because I personally don't believe that, we've got 4 years left. I believe that we have multiple generations left. I'm imparting to my children that they're going to be around. I think when people have the view that we're at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, why would you teach your kids anything? Like, why would you prepare them for life at all when you think you're going to be gone in 4 years or 10 years?
I know people who actually live that way, and they didn't send their kids to college back in the 80s or 90s.
Because the world's going to end. Why would you? Right? It makes no sense. So I think it's dangerous sometimes when you're so assured. Just at the end of the day, and I'll let you continue on, always be, if you're going to believe in something when it comes to your viewpoint, you be 99%. But always leave that 1% open to be like, it'd be interesting. Maybe I'll read the other side of this thing. And just to always keep an open mind when it comes to your biblical worldview, because again, you might be wrong. And it's happened many times in my Christian walk. And like you said, it's happened to you, Brian, and many people that are listening or tuning in on YouTube. I'm sure it's been the case. However long they've been Christian, there's certain things that you have been rock solid at one point, but now you're completely against. So it happens to all of us.
Yeah. And I would agree with you that, God is doing something here, and maybe he's judging us, and maybe he's judging more than America. He's judging the world. That could very well be. But that doesn't mean it's prophetic. Doesn't mean there's a prophecy that says that. Because God has done this throughout all of history, and there are not prophecies for it throughout all of history. So my argument would be that, and this is what I say with people like, wait a minute, you're saying the Antichrist was Nero? And not only that, but I would say, no, Nero was not the Antichrist. Nero was the beast. Antichrist is actually a phrase that has no reference to an individual whatsoever. It has to do with anyone who rejects Jesus as Messiah, which in the first century, that had to do with the Jews who rejected Messiah. He was calling them Antichrist. You look it up in the book of 1 John. There's nowhere that says there's an individual Antichrist. And then they say, well, wait a minute. So you're saying there's no great evil that's coming? It's like, no, just because I don't think there's a mark of the beast in our future doesn't mean I think it's okay to put a chip in my hand. I still think that tyranny is wrong, even if it's not fulfilling a prophecy.
Correct.
And so here's my thing. So those of us who do think that, all this stuff that they're looking for, it's like you're spending your time, your heart, your energy obsessed with this looking for the Great Tribulation, the end of all this stuff, and it's not going to happen. You're wasting your time, because you should be about the kingdom of God, sharing the gospel with people, but also the belief that we're in the end times is an escapist mentality. Like you said, it may result in people doing things like, well, why go to college? Why learn much anything? Whatever. That's the extreme. Stupid people do that. But it does something else, even to the so-called smart people who are thinking it. What it does is it devalues this world, this earth. And God created this earth as good. And when God gave the mandate in Genesis 1, the cultural mandate, he said to cultivate and keep the garden, but also have dominion over the earth. So God values this world. I'm not saying the world is in the sin and the devil and stuff. I'm saying this earth and the existence. He gave us bodies and he gave us this life. And when you're thinking that we're going to fly out of here or whatever, you're not putting your heart and energy into transforming the culture to honor God's law. And so once you take away that Great Tribulation, Antichrist, and all that rapture and all that kind of stuff, you go, well, what do we have to do? What do we look forward to? Well, here's what it is. I always go back to Daniel 2, the mountain that fills the earth. The Messiah, Jesus, is the stone that hits the Roman kingdom. And in verse 44, in the days of those kings, God will set up, in the days of those kings, is talking about, Rome. Rome is the culmination of those kings. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end. And so that stone is the messianic stone of a Messiah. And it says that it will become a great mountain to fill the whole earth. So what it is let us go about the twofold Genesis mandate and Great Commission, right? It's spread the gospel, disciple the nations, but also work to make the world a better place, because we are here to reform the world to be in line with God's law. And to those who say, oh, you're trying to bring God's law, you're trying to bring the kingdom of God unto earth by human will. No, I'm not. It's the Holy Spirit that does that work. But the point is should we fight against abortion? Should we fight against bad laws? Should we fight against gender theory? Yes, we should. We should fight to get rid of it, to return to God's law. Now, will we win now in our time in life? I don't know, maybe not. But we should fight and to bring the gospel and to bring the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is not just spiritual salvation, spiritual rescue, spiritual escape.
Well, and he works through his people all the time. I mean, you see this continually.
It transforms the culture, the world that we live in, and that's what we should be working towards, and that's why we should be fighting this evil and fighting with all our heart, because one day in the future, it will be gotten rid of. It could be the distant future. People always say, oh, come on, don't be ridiculous, look at how bad things are now. Yeah, well, pull back. I always tell people, pull back and look at history as a timeline. Actually, I'll grant you that there was actually transgenderism in Rome, but it may not have been to the extreme that you're saying, where a man literally thinks he's a woman. Okay.
There were transgenderism, but I'm talking about where psychologically they started doubting their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's a whole new level.
But my argument is, but Rome was far worse, at least than America. Because I've done extensive study on Rome, and I would not want to live in Rome.
So are we heading back to Rome?
So no, my argument is just, I have no problem admitting history has ups and downs, and civilizations tend to rise and fall and crash. But all I'm saying is, consider this. Remember World War, we weren't here, but in World War II, it looked like the whole world was going to be blown up and the Antichrist was going to take over, Hitler, right? But there was a real thing that the whole world could blow up and we could all die or all be enslaved to Nazism or whatever. And it was really bad. It was worse than what we're going through now. Mm-hmm. But what happened? We did win.
Yep.
We won, and we transformed Europe. Now, things slid back. But all I'm saying is, we have to stop being myopic and thinking just what we're experiencing now is the paradigm was what it's always going to be. Because what God often does is he destroys civilizations so he could rebuild them with goodness. What did he do to America as it was? He got rid of, Puritans left England, which was a horrible world for them, and they started a new world. Sometimes we have to experience great suffering and experience maybe even a civilization collapse before we learn the lesson of what not to do, and then we rise up and grow and build a better civilization based on God's laws and not the laws of man. Now, it may not happen now, but all I'm saying is, yes, things are really bad and they're getting worse, and I can see them getting worse for now. But that doesn't mean
that's where our children, we're the next generation and the generations to come, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Usually these things, take place over a long period of time. I mean, if you start, you said you've looked into, heavily researched Rome. I mean, what was it, 1,000-year reign? I mean, America, if you think about world empire, and I've said this for a long time, guys, it will be one of the shortest lived world empires in history. Period.
Exactly.
No, period.
Exactly.
And that's just the case. I mean, Rome was 1,000 years. I mean, what's America, 250 or something like that right now? So, I mean, it's not even remotely close. I mean, I think it's coming to an end as far as a world empire, period. I mean, I think, China and other things are coming up. But again, this is where a lot of people like to look at the Bible and say, see, that's Magog. See, that's, the East.
And again, I'm not saying things aren't bad. I do agree. Things are very evil.
Yes.
But we have reason to fight it because we believe that God's kingdom, what is it? What does God promise? It shall not be left to another people. It will never be destroyed, and it will break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end.
Well, in ways, if you think you're in the tribulation, there is no reason to do anything because you can't win. If you do believe, there is no way possible. I mean, the only thing that's going to happen is your head's going to get cut off. I mean, really, if you start thinking about the only way, and I think and it's weird too. It's weird how people will and this is me also, cling to it. Like, I don't want to get rid of it, but yet it's so horrifying. It's so horrifying. Maybe it's the fact that it's coming to an end and I'm going to be with my maker. But really, it is very strange, such a horrifying outcome that really, in the next decade, my head's going to be cut off. We're all going to die as Christians in that view, in that worldview. And yet when someone comes along and says, let's look at the Bible. No, I want to keep this. Yet it's horrifying for me to live in that environment, by looking at a different view of saying, look, all throughout history, this is what's happened. God has brought down empires, but also he's brought beautiful things out of it. And he's rebirthed some incredible things throughout history, right? And the church has thrived. I mean, look at the Reformation, for goodness sakes. I mean, was a huge deal. What happened with the Reformation, the Civil War.
The Civil War,
huge.
Right? I mean, look at what it did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was great pain and great suffering. You say, how can this possibly result in anything good? Well, it did, didn't it?
It did. It did. Yeah, it did.
So.
And that's the question too, though, that comes up though for a lot of people is at what point though do you advocate? This is kind of a topic right now where a lot of people are talking about. At what point do people, take back, with physical force, right? I mean, I think that any violence right now is definitely not called for. I'm not an advocate of it. I don't stand for it. I think it's wrong. Yeah. But at what question, do things spill over where all of a sudden it does? Is America headed towards the Civil War? Possibly. I mean, really, if you start looking at kind of I think Biden has done more executive orders than all 5 presidents combined in the first week. I mean, that's insane. Yeah. I mean, Trump was He's 2 and if you, I don't know if you've looked into it, but it's he's done something in the first week, 34 executive orders or something. Yep. The first 3 days he did 17. Well, if you look at Trump, he did 2. And I'm not even saying Trump. Bush had done 3.
Even
Obama had done 4. Yeah, 4. And yet Biden's 30 and he's done insane amounts. So the question is, but it seems like there's no even working together now, right? There's no unity. There is literally at a point now where they've drawn the line in the sand. Literally, they've put up a fence all around DC and kept the friggin' military there for their protection. Something has changed in America. But the question is, at what point do people get backed into a corner where their voices aren't heard and something does happen, unfortunately? Yeah. I guess my question to you, Brian, is at that point, when does being a Christian and the mandate of preaching the good news, the Great Commission versus being a patriot, in America, specifically with America, being a Christian in America, do you think that there's a danger of getting tainted with this too much patriotism and falling for that lie? In my opinion, there's a healthy view of that, but there's also a very dangerous view and becoming where all of a sudden you start shifting to our greatest cause is the First Amendment, or it's the, looking that direction. Maybe you can kind of discuss that as a Christian. At what point do you kind of keep yourself focused?
Yeah, I've thought a little bit about this, and I think that the Reformation actually has a good, probably the strongest understanding of what is an appropriate civil disobedience, or what would be appropriate righteous violence. And traditionally, people tend to think like, well, when things get so bad that the people just rise up, but that's the mob. And so, and people often say, well, you point out the mob is, the French Revolution is a perfect example of how evil the mob is, and by the way, the Capitol riots in that sense are just as bad as the BLM 100%. Or the Antifa. Maybe not as bad technically, like individual, but because in principle, it's just a mob and Correct. People, just running rampant with chaos. And that's revolution. Revolution, which is driving the left and it's driving Democrats, they believe in revolution. So that's why they did nothing while Antifa and BLM burned down our cities.
For months and months and months as well.
And they believe it's justified because everything's so wrong in their eyes, so therefore they shouldn't strike out.
Well, America's evil, right? America's evil, it's racist, and it needs to be destroyed, and we need to start from scratch.
Now, no matter how true that is,
no, it's not true. I'm being sarcastic.
Right. No, but I'm saying even if it was true, the Christian approach is revolution is never acceptable. Sometimes I wish it was, because I feel like there's truly a double standard of justice, and there's two sets of justice in this country, and that is not equal justice. But anyway, but the Christian understanding, the Reformed thinking argues this, and that is, revolution is not acceptable. Mm-hmm. Only war backed up by magistrates is. And what I mean by that is, when people say that the American Revolution was a revolution, actually it wasn't. That's a misnomer. It was a war of independence, because the Americans basically seated behind their local magistrates. Yes. And it was the magistrates that declared war on the king as the higher magistrate, right? And so that is a legitimate righteous violence.
Correct.
So an example of that would be, so in other words, no, I don't think the Capitol riots are just or right.
You're talking about don't take things into your own hands, but under a mandate from your authorities, then you're saying it's okay as far as.
So like if Texas concludes, like, for example, if I'm trying to think of a realistic example of actually what could happen, if they really do try to enforce these gun laws that they have, it is so outrageous. The violation of the Constitution is so outrageous that if they try to do this, and they would try to implement that, and Texas says no, that's against the Constitution, mm-hmm. and we're going to stand against it. And if you bring any of your armed men in here, we'll shoot them, because we have the Constitution, and we as a state have our own sovereignty in relation to that, and the Constitution is higher than you. That would be just for us to then join in with Texans to join together, which, by the way, I live in Texas now. So it would be just for us to join together to protect under our magistrates fighting against the evil higher magistrate. Mm-hmm. So, but if people just rise up in mobs and go around killing people because they think that's always wrong. See, Correct. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that's my stance as well too. I don't think you can find any example, what would Jesus do? People always refer to the whole thing. Well, he flipped the money changers. Well, I don't know if you want to maybe explain what your view on that is, but they'll always use this as far as expressing it's okay for Christians to be violent against authorities because look what he did, in the temple. Right. But again, I think there's a complete, there's no parallel whatsoever compared to, revolution to what Jesus did in the money changers, right? But this is what I see. I honestly have a hard time finding any type of Christian mandate to take matters in your own hands. I mean, I would even go so far as, try to find defense for self-defense. I'm not saying that it's not good to do self-defense, but where did Jesus support it? You know what I mean? He said, if someone smacks you, you give them your other cheek, stuff like this. People say, oh, it was just, figurative. Well, no, he was saying literally, like, if someone asks you, if they force you to walk a mile, go 2 miles, right? I mean,
the context behind that, don't you?
Well, yeah, I know, I understand. But what I'm saying is the idea behind it overall, I think, is more passive than aggressive, is what I will say, as far as my understanding. Maybe you could kind of clarify what your understanding is.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. And I struggle with what's the proper balanced biblical approach to it all, because the Old Testament is not a different God than the God of the New Testament.
Correct.
And so when God does give the law about self-defense, the principle is, protecting your family, whatever, someone trying to hurt you, kill you, whatever, that's legitimate. But then also, well, what about the times where the apostles just were martyred or whatever, right? So I realize it's not always cut and dry, easy. However, I would say that a lot of times the context of these don't fit the pacifism. So, for example, the other cheek is basically an insult. I mean, it's a backhanded. It's actually backhanded because you don't hit on the left side. Most people are right-handed, so it's basically backhanding them. And it is insult. It's an insult. It's not a act of violence like trying to kill you or something, or trying to beat you up. And the other element of the walking the extra mile was that the Roman armies, they were in submission to Rome, and Roman soldiers could ask them to walk could force them to walk a mile to carry their equipment with them. And he's saying, go beyond that. Walk more with them. And so here's how I understand it too, is because my movie, To End All Wars, actually wrestles with this very issue. And I don't have a pat answer because I acknowledge that it's complex. And
nor do I. Just because I'm taking this viewpoint, it's more for discussion. Nor do I. These are very complex issues to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, in fact, some people would, watch the movie and are like, well, because the movie is about Christianity, and these are prisoners, and should they fight against their captors or not? And the way I put it is this: that the Bible is very situational in its ethics. In other words, certain situations dictate different needs, right? And so, consequently, I call it the ethics of captivity are not the same as the ethics of war. So, in war, God actually gives Israel rules of war. So there is just war in the Bible, and if you accept that premise, then you say, well, but when you're in captivity, you still seek to try to overthrow them and kill the camp guards and all that kind of stuff. And the principle is no. Then you're looking at captivity. Once you are under the submission of captors, you follow the rules, even though it's unjust, and you do your best to obey, because just like people in Rome's government, Peter would say, honor Nero Caesar, even though he was a wicked criminal, right? And so there is a basic principle of, once you're held captive, then you are supposed to submit and obey them. But in war, it's not. You're fully fighting each other. So I think there's a situational ethic that is very clearly a part of that reality.
It's almost like fight until you're subdued, but one time you're subdued, then submit.
Yeah. And then look at Daniel, right? I mean, Daniel was in unjustly, but he followed all the rules, even to his detriment, and he was willing to, and of course the classical argument is for civil disobedience is you do everything you can peaceably and you do everything you can legally, and then when you disobey, you still disobey peacefully, and you must be willing to accept the consequences, which would be beaten up, jailed, or martyred. And that is the basic classical Christian take on it. But that has to do with like civil disobedience. And again, what I say is that still doesn't apply to magistrates. Magistrates is a different issue.
Yes.
Because if Texas calls upon us to protect our borders from the incursion of the United States government because it is violating its sovereignty, and which, by the way, is in the Constitution. We have an element of sovereignty. That's what federalism is. I will do it. I will rise to defend Texas because it's the magistrates declaring war or whatever, declaring defense against higher magistrates. But I will not, get in a mob and run around and shoot people out in the streets.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
Well, that's kind of where you draw the line, right? So
or anything. I mean, well, let's put it this way. The thing that the riots,
real quick, what do you think then churches should be doing as far as when they're being mandated to either shut their doors or they're not allowed to worship? The reason I'm bringing this up is because our old church here in my city here in Edmonton, Alberta, has got to the point now where they're already in defiance. They've got fined. They're probably maybe even going to be going to jail here soon because he won't. Wow. Our order here where we're at now is no worship, no singing, even with masks, no singing, right? And he's like, really? Sorry, I can't do this, right? And he's kind of on the line of saying, no, I'm going to obey God. This is the time we have to, civil disobedience, but also biblically speaking. What's your view when it comes to this whole new concept of, what we're dealing with, where they're like saying, no, you're not allowed to worship God, or you're not allowed to fellowship at church. The government comes in and says, sorry, because, we want to protect you. We want to keep everyone safe. You guys cannot meet at church. What's your view on that as a Christian? I think this will hit home here, ending the show just as Christians, because it's one thing, talking about, capital or our rights, but it's another thing when they're saying you can no longer go to church or you can't even worship if you are in church.
And the problem is that the nuance is it's not black and white, because when they tell Peter not to preach the gospel, that's pretty just, it's just power. It's like, don't preach the gospel. But there is at least some legitimacy to the safety issue, right? So the problem is that our government, you're in Canada, it's the same thing, but our governments are fascistically seeking to exert arbitrary power over us. Mm-hmm. And however, because it's not cut and dry because of the fact that there is a safety thing involved. So I'm definitely of the opinion that John MacArthur is a hero and what he did was right. Yeah. And as long as you do it as carefully as you can, maybe distance, maybe wear masks if you have to, try to acknowledge that there is some danger with people getting the COVID, some danger, but yeah, you should not cease meeting together and worshiping God. That is, especially because they are overreaching. But at the end of the day, you have to just be willing to go to jail for it and take the licks, if you're willing to do that,
Yeah, but you definitely think that is justified, and that's something that the Christians are called to do. Yeah.
This isn't boy, I mean, it would be harder if it was something like something that was really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. It has like a 99% survive rate.
Well, yeah,
and, it's mostly
it's ridiculous.
old people.
It is.
So it's like, let's
really
keep the old
ridiculous.
people in there. Let's give them our, I meant to say, show them the videos of the church services and keep them protected. But, it's
protect the most
else.
vulnerable. I mean, I think this is common sense. A lot of people can see this, but again, they've got to a whole new level, with insanity, with draconian measures. I mean, but really, I don't think a lot of these things, kind of like what happened after 9/11, with the airport, it never did go back to normal. I mean, it literally became a way of life, which, I think a lot of things that are taking place are, we're never going back to normal, I guess, if that's
and then they justified the whole NSA spying on all Americans illegally. Yep. They justified it by 9/11. Well, this is what they do. And this is why the whole Capitol riots, they're seizing on this. This is like
the Patriot Act, what's so frightening about that, and people warned about it then, they said, guys, it's all good and dandy, but what if all of a sudden we become the terrorists? What if we become the worst threats now? And this is
and that's what we are.
No, they're saying this. They are literally saying that American citizens are worse than international terrorists around the world. Exactly. They are our biggest threat. This to me is such scary language, the way they're doing this on white supremacy and racism and all. But they're lumping everyone together. Conservative Christians, Trump supporters, QAnon,
libertarians,
whatever. Conspiracy theorists. They're lumping everyone together, and they're saying not that these guys are crazy, or they're saying they are a major domestic terrorism threat that America has never seen before, and we need to deal with it. I was watching a thing today and talking about how the fences around D.C. are never going down because the threat of domestic terrorism with right-wing conspiracy theory, conservative Christian, militia groups, whatever they're saying, is that heightened in their minds. Exactly. Yeah. But again, is it in their minds, or do they honestly have they been hyped into such a frenzy they actually believe it? Like some of these people, you kind of listen to them and you're like, maybe some of them actually believe it. They're not just lying. They actually believe. They're that scared of just, there were people you'd run into even about Trump, and they just like, they cringe. They'd be like, oh my goodness, he is the biggest racist. And you'd be like, can you name anything racist that he's ever said? Well, no, he's just a racist. I have had those talks with actual people, and it's a denial and a delusion that's so deep that it's got to be supernatural. There you go. I've admitted some supernatural. What a great way to end the show. Supernatural. We got Brian Godawa on the supernatural. Godawa, sorry, is going in there. Awesome. Just got him on the supernatural. No, it was great. We got everything going. We went through so many great things. Guys, if you have a chance, check out his links in the description. Go to his website, subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's got so many books. Up to 24, you said?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Novels.
It's such a great thing. We're going to have to get you on again here in the future and just talk. I think it's great. I love having guests on that challenge people, get people thinking outside the box and just start looking into different areas. I think it's worthwhile. Do you have anything real quick to say here as we're wrapping up?
No, I guess Godawa.com, and all my books are on Amazon exclusively in paperback, audio, and ebook.
Oh, thank you so much, Ryan. It's been great to have you on Celebrate Truth Radio. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. 24/7 live stream will be up on YouTube about 5 minutes after the show ends. So until then, next week, same time, same place. Good night, everyone. Blessings to you.